Welcome back to Cpp.chat, a sometimes weekly and sometimes monthly, it seems, look at what's going on in the world of C++, chatting with guests from the community. But before we get to this week's guest, we just need to semantically merge in a disclaimer. John?
Thank you. This disclaimer is in all uppercase, so I'm going to have to do all this. I'm going to shout it and hope to not blow out the microphone here. Disclaimer of warranty. You acknowledge that the code is provided as is, and Cpp.chat expressly declaims all warranties and conditions, including but not limited to any implied warranties of non-infringement, merchantability, or fitness for a particular purpose, or any form of warranty that operation of the code will be error-free. Thank you for that. Our guest on this episode is Pablo Santos. I think we've been wanting to get you on since you were on CPPcast, which was at the end of last year. Did you get a good response from that appearance?
Yeah, thank you for. Well, I'm happy to be back with you. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I think we have this in our notes to say, but they just released today their 200th episode with Herb Sutter. Not their 200th episode with Herb Sutter. 200th episode, which happens to be with Herb Sutter. This one.
That would have been exceptional.
Yeah, it would have been exceptional. That's right. And it's a fun episode, as you would expect with Herb. So yeah, you should go listen to that. Do we have other items of note that we want to talk about before diving into our topic today?
There's a little bit of conference news. Most of it's the same as we've been talking about recently. Other than, did we mention the ACCU autumn conference or fall conference?
I don't think we've ever talked about it. So they've got a conference that is the 2 days. It's in Belfast. It is the 2 days after the Belfast meeting.
That's right.
So for those of you that are conference junkies, this is an opportunity to see speakers you might not otherwise get to see, because they're hoping to get people who go to conferences and will stay over an extra couple of days. I mean, not to go to conferences, I mean, go to committee meetings. So it's possible you're going to get to see some speakers you might not otherwise get to see. So that's a reason to think about that one. And it is immediately before then meeting C++. Yeah. Which I just this week was able to confirm I'm definitely going to be able to go to. I actually am going to be doing some training the week after, so I'm definitely going to be able to make it.
It's going to be a long trip for you then.
Oh yeah, I'm very excited about this. Yeah. So what else do we have to say? Oh, C++ Now. C++ Now has wound up. I don't think we've had an episode since then. No. You weren't there this time, so we didn't get to do an on-site episode, but that's always fun, but we didn't do that this year. The big news, I guess, from a news point of view, is we have a new speaker, Connor Hoekstra, who so delighted the crowd that he essentially walked away with all of the best session awards. I think Dave Sankel got one award, and even then, Connor was like runner-up on that award. So everybody's waiting to see the video, and of course the videos aren't up yet. They're supposed to be up pretty soon, but they're not up yet. So everybody's talking to me about that. I do, however, want to announce for those of you who are keeping track, speaker feedback is already out. Speaker feedback is not out for CPPCon half a year ago, but we've got it out for C++ Now, and that's thanks in large part to Peter Bendels, who's introduced a new feedback system, which I hope we're going to have for CPPCon, so we have better and faster feedback to speakers. Anyway, have you report for us on Core C++?
Yeah, so Core C++ was the new conference in Tel Aviv this year, and I was there, did a workshop and a talk, and as it turned out, 2 lightning talks as well. And it was a great conference.
You say that like you hadn't planned to do that. Were these like last minute things?
The lightning talks were, yes.
I see.
I think we registered for them maybe a couple of weeks before the conference, and I got 2 accepted. So, as I say, it was a great conference, very well run, very smooth. very little went wrong. I think the most critical I could say was that there were some connectivity issues, but most new conferences have that. Mine certainly did. So no complaints there. Very impressed. We'll definitely be going back. And it was my first time in Tel Aviv or Israel in general, and I'll definitely be going back there as well. Just wish I'd had a few more days either side of the conference to enjoy that. So anyone that has the opportunity to go there, I do recommend you give it a try.
Let me ask you a question. Were there a lot of trip reports there? We only got 2 trip reports for C++ Now. Last year we had 8. I think all the trip reporter people must have gone to, because they were almost the same. They weren't exactly the same time. Core was the next week, so they were very close. Yeah.
I do remember seeing a couple of trip reports. Don't remember there being a lot. So maybe people are just all trip reported out.
Could be. All right. So I did mention Meeting C++. They're still taking the call for submissions, which is important because I haven't put in my submission yet. And C++ Russia, the autumn one, because there's 2 now. Yep. So spring and an autumn. I guess spring is going to be in Moscow and autumn is St. Petersburg. Is that how it's going to work?
That's how it is this year. I presume it's going to be the same next year.
Okay. And NDC Tech Town.
Yep.
They've announced speakers. They haven't announced all the schedule, but they've announced speakers. So we'll have a link to that.
I shall put a link in the show notes. I think actually the schedule might be there now.
Okay.
Need to check that.
And is there a JetBrains update here?
There is, yes. I put it in. So we've just started the EAP for C-Line 2019.2. So EAP, if you don't know, is our name for a beta early access program. So we'll be releasing that in a couple of months. But right now, you can download that for free and start playing with it. Okay. And as you can imagine, there's always lots of new features. But one of the ones that people are talking about the most is parameter hints. So this is where you're writing a call to a function or a constructor, and after you've written it, it will actually fill in line in the code the names of the parameters. So it's almost like you've got named arguments. But it's doing that for you. So that's a really nice feature that we're actually rolling out across pretty much all of the IDEs, even the C++ IDE, C-Line. So definitely give that a try.
That's got to be a lot of fun with overloaded functions, right?
Yes, but we have to deal with those anyway. They've done a really good job. I've been playing around with it, and I did find 1 or 2 limitations. I mean, it's only the first version of the EAP, so there's time to fix it. I think it's an unbounded problem in general, but it is even coping with variadic templates sort of forwarding on to other functions. So, a good example would be make unique or make shared. So we'll even give you the parameter hints for those.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's...
oh, that's very clever.
They've done a very good job of that.
Yeah, I'm impressed. That's very clever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just have to try it for yourself.
Yeah. Which I guess can be arranged.
Yep. Well, I shall put a link in the show notes.
Okay. All right. All right. So we should talk about plastic SCM. And but I think the really exciting thing to talk about is semantic merge. But I think mostly when you were on CPPcast, Pablo, you were talking about semantic merge. But let's save that and talk a little bit about plastic first.
Okay, sure. So, well, first, thank you for giving me the chance to be with you today. I'm very happy to spend this time with you guys. So, okay, I'm Pablo Santos. I'm the founder and CTO at Cody Software. We're a Spanish company, and we have been in business for the last 14 years doing version control. So we are one of the few crazy ones doing full stack version control out there, right? Which is like super exciting and of course quite difficult in terms of, all the options you have to cover and all the competition that it's there, especially from the Git side of things, right? So plastic is, as I said, a full stack version control. By full stack, I mean it's not built on top of another system. It's not just a GUI. It's not just, a web layer on top of Git or something else. It's really like the core part, plus the command line, the GUIs, and everything, right? So we built everything from scratch. And you might be wondering now, okay, why on earth anyone should go for something different than Git these days, right? And well, the reason why we're still in business and we are doing well, hopefully, is that, well, thankfully, I will say, is that we have a few differentiators from Git, right? Basically, Plastic is very strong in several industries. One of them is the gaming industry, and that's because we are very good with super big repos and super big files. So having repositories in Plastic, over 4 terabytes or 5 terabytes or something like that, it's not a big deal. We also can work distributed like Git does, so that's not a big difference. But we, at the same time, even at the same repo, we can work centralized. So Plastic can work centralized, and that's very good for, give flexibility to many teams, especially when the repos are large, because you don't need to have like a local clone eating a lot of disk space and so on, right? So you can,
particularly with repositories that large.
Exactly. And also the other, well, there are many other things, right? But the key tool probably these two, plus also visualization. Like we focus on the entire stack, the GUIs, and we do something we are very proud of, which is the branch explorer. And then, of course, on top of that, we do our own div tool, our own merge tool, our own side-by-side div. And part of that is what you mentioned already, which is semantic.
So before we get into that, I want to ask you this. This is the privilege of having a podcast like this, is that I get people like you on and I get to ask the question I've always wanted to ask somebody who was in the repository business. Okay. Here's the question is, do you have any non-code customers? In other words, I can't imagine a sophisticated piece of software where you don't have a repository. You have multiple people working and you're going to try to do this with just sharing files. You would go insane. You have to have a repository. However, we are not the only people who do this. If I'm doing a large document, like, I don't know what, like maybe a dictionary or an encyclopedia or something like that, where we have lots and lots of editors, I'm thinking mostly of text, obviously, but it really could be anything. It could be architecture plans or anything like that. Do you have any market outside of traditional source code or people doing software? I mean, obviously, essentially, it's software by nature. But I mean something other than code.
Well, that's a very good question. In fact, we have some, but they are all, around some development they do. Like, we don't have like, a group of people doing books or something using Plastic, but we have teams using Plastic for code, and then they have people using Plastic for something else. Of course, there's something here.
Like
exactly. In fact, that's a good story, because there are a couple of things here. One of them is, well, in games, all the artists that use Plastic, they don't work with code, right? They work with big files, they work with assets, they work with video, they work with all that. So they are primary customers of Plastic, right? So they are one of the key reasons
because those are hard to diff, right? And so you have to make any little tiny change, you got to store the whole file.
Exactly, but not only that, it's also the workflow. I mean, we have like 2 workflows and 2 GUIs for each operating system we support, and one of them is really for developers, all the branching, merging, all the things we breathe on a daily basis, and the other one is really focused on on artists, and this is completely different. It's not only what happens on the background, because it's like, okay, you store files, that's it, right? But it's about how you use it. And the funny story is that after that, in some teams, we found out that they started using Plastic for development. Then if they are in games, they use it for assets and so on, which is pretty natural. But we also found out some teams putting everything, some other things into version control. And we thought it was going to be only something we did internally. For instance, I'll tell you something about that. Internally, our sales team use Plastic, and our people in administration, they use Plastic for almost everything. But that's basically because it's like our all culture here, and everyone wants to use the product and so on. So it's not, it's like something, eating your own dog's food or something like that. But we found some teams outside doing that, and then from a business
I would think lawyers. This is a perfect example. Lawyers.
Yeah.
I would imagine they would want to have every change to the document. We want to know who made the change. We want to know why they made the change. Those kinds of things. That to me, and the ability to diff to contracts, to me, I would imagine lawyers would be all over this.
The thing is, we thought about that many times. I mean, in like from a business perspective, like, should we stand to other markets? Should we go into different kind of business with the core we already have? And I think from a technology perspective, we could probably do it. The thing is, like always with products, the focus. I mean, it's not just about the core. You cannot ask a lawyer to use the same GUI a developer is using, because simply they think in a different way, right? They don't want to know about branching or merging or even commit. Maybe they just want to something that happens behind the scenes, for instance. So answering your question is something we have considered many times, but we don't have a product as such yet. It's something we thought many times, but who knows? Maybe
you probably need to think about it on entirely different GUI, different terms. Yeah, no, it's probably quite the undertaking. Although, if you make that investment, it might pay off well, because there's lots of lawyers out there. Too many.
It's about the mentality of how to think about the product, right? You should think in a totally different way than we are used to, right? We are a team of developers creating software for developers like us, and then we have to really switch and think into different ways. So yeah, but that's a really interesting thing.
I won't repeat what Robert Ramey in the chat is saying about lawyers right now, but
I won't repeat that just in case my lawyer.
But I will mention that he is saying that he's storing architectural designs in Git as it happens, and he's finding that works pretty well for him. So there's another non-source code use.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of what Pablo was just saying. Once you learn how to use it, you see also. I mean, that's the biggest. I mean, if I were to propose this to let's say I knew there are a couple of people who are writing and say, hey, you guys should use a repository as a writing team, but it would just be a nightmare for two people to do that. It's complicated. They got to learn things. They got to do all this stuff. On the other hand, if you happen to have two programmers that want to get together and write a science fiction story, and you say, oh, you should use a repository, they say, oh, of course, that's what we're doing. It's like, once you know the tool, it's an automatic, obvious thing to do. Right?
Absolutely. And but it's also about the tools you use, right? Many tools we use as developers are completely around the concept of versioning stuff. I mean, because basically they are plain text files, right? And that makes diffing and everything various reasons. I was writing at the beginning of the year, I created a book on version control, really around plastic SCM. And I started writing it with Word, but then I switched to, something else, because I really wanted to diff and merge changes, incorporate changes from other people and all that. So you end up writing in a text editor or something. And that's something natural as a developer, but don't ask probably someone outside that world to use a plain text editor to write a lot of tests, because he will go crazy or something.
Right. No, it makes sense. So let's talk about the exciting, cool, sexy thing. The semantic merge. And I got to say that it kind of blew my mind when I heard you talking about this on CPP.cast. So explain to us what semantic merge is.
Okay, well, here it is. I mean, ask any programmer how diff should be, and they probably will tell you, well, if I move a function to a different location, the diff should detect that, right? So what we did was only to implement what everyone had in mind, but never did before. So from the very beginning, back in 2005, when we were just starting the company, we wanted to do this, but it took us a while to get there, because first, we were just building the core of plastic, and then we were trying to make it work and getting our first customer, and very busy days. But then at some point around 2011 or 2012, we started working into this tool. And basically what it does is what everyone listening right now will be thinking, which is, okay, we parse the code first, and we don't diff on a line per line basis, which is what every diff tool on earth does, because we built our own too, right? But we parse the code first. We create a structure with where every function is, what is a container, like if you have a class and it has functions, or it has attributes, or you have fields or whatever in depending on the language, and then we merge and diff based on that. Well, first diff, then merge based on that. Since we already had a lot of experience doing this kind of work with directories and files and tree structures, it was completely different code, but really applying the same know-how, right? So at the end of the day, what you can get with semantic is that, okay, what's the actual value? I mean, the thing is, you want to refactor your file, you want to move things around, clean up stuff, you can do it, and you don't have to worry on, okay, what is going to happen when I diff it? It's going to be crazy. Or what is going to happen when I merge it? What if someone else was making a fix too? That's what we try to resolve.
Yeah. One of the things that I think about, it's crazy, but I actually think about this when I write code. For example, if I want to add, let's say I have a bunch of enums and I want to add a new enum. If I'm adding an enum at the bottom, then let's say I have this written in a vertical list rather than a horizontal list. So I have this vertical list, and now I'm going to add the last enum, but I actually have to add a comma to the enum before it,
Absolutely.
which means now that line is going to have a diff line as well, right? Which is like, yeah, it should understand more about what I'm trying to do semantically and recognize that comma is really not part of that line, it's part of the line that follows. And so you end up with weird things where I've actually seen code where people will put commas before things just just so the diff is on the right line when they add or remove that item.
And not only the diff, it's also about the merge, right? You create a manual conflict if you just modify things. You just add something and someone else was. I mean, you have an enum, then both of us add the new entry. The merge probably be automatic. That's exactly what we try to do. Where we really excel is in terms of classes and functions or methods in Java and C#. Well, we support C, C++, Java, C# too, and then a few other languages too. The downside of working on a semantic-based tool is that you need to create a parser first. I mean, we have the test-based one as fallback, and it works with everything. I mean, it will work with a love letter or C++ because it doesn't care, right, what is there. But then once you start parsing languages, you are dependent on what you support. And one of the cases that is super interesting is, suppose you add a function at the end of a class, and then I add another one. Normally, for almost every merge tool out there, I mean, I will say for everyone, for all of them, you will get a conflict. Like, okay, you added something on the same line, but you will say as a human, but it's just two different methods. So why don't you do it automatic? And with semantic, it's of course automatic. Another example, suppose I move a method up for whatever reason. I want to put visibility thing. I mean, more visible things up or whatever, right? And then at the same time, you just made a small fix. Well, two things can happen: that the code is duplicated, which is really bad. It can happen, or that you have a manual, conflict or something, which is a pain to solve. Not super difficult, but a pain. With semantic, it will be probably automatic. Like, you just get your change moved up into the right location, and that's some of the things.
And the clue you're using is the same thing that we as humans do, which is we named the function. So obviously, we think it's the same function. We may see it's been modified, but it's the same function. That's why it has the same name, right?
Absolutely. And the thing is that things get a little bit more complicated after that, because what happens when you rename a function? We still want to know it's the same, right? So we based on the actual body of the function. So we stop the parsing at the function level. I mean, we don't do this diffing for ifs and elses and for loops or something. We just want to look into the structure, and as soon as we detect the method, we treat the body as a text block. So to actually, suppose you rename a function and move it to a different location inside the file, what we do is, okay, we detect a deletion plus an added one because it wasn't there before. And I mean, the original one is not there anymore because the name is not there. The new one wasn't there before. So what we do is actually match the deletions and added. And if the content is similar, more than a certain percentage similar, then we can match it. And that's basically how it works. The super interesting thing here is that, we started with that a few years ago. We were adding more languages. We completely rewrite the GUI a couple of times, because one thing is having the core, but I can tell you the really difficult thing is to make it understandable. Like, I mean, you could do it from a command line or something, but then it will be crazy. So we actually rewrote the GUI a couple of times, and then we created a new piece of code on top to actually be able to do these sort of merges across files. And that's what I'm really super excited about.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
you move a function to a different file because you're refactoring, splitting, whatever, and someone modified in the original file, and then you get it merged on the real destination, right? And that's something super cool. So that's one of the things. This is probably just the start, but yeah, I mean,
But this has really been, you were saying, this has really been the vision from the beginning.
Yeah,
this is where you wanted to be.
Absolutely.
So that's got to be very satisfying for you after having built up a business to let you start going down the really exciting path that you'd wanted to do from the beginning.
Absolutely. I mean, there are a couple of things here, and I think as every programmer will probably face that, right? Like at the beginning, it looks like super big, and then once you have it, it's like, why we didn't do it before? I mean, it wasn't that big, right? But probably you just underestimate all the steps you made before. Like, I mean, I always get the same feeling. Like, okay, now we have it merging cross-file stuff, and they say, okay, but we were talking about that back in 2011 or something. So it's not that big. It's not that, and it wasn't that such a huge effort. But you always take for granted all the steps you did before.
Yeah.
At least that's what happens to me many times.
Well, I wonder if maybe you just get you get kind of intimidated because it's what I think of as the difference between an algorithm and a heuristic. An algorithm will always give you the correct answer, whereas a heuristic is kind of a best guess. And the problem is, if you're trying to write software around a heuristic, you have to think about, well, what about those cases where it doesn't quite work? And how do you make that not brittle? How do you make that not come all apart just because, oh, somebody took a function, renamed it, moved it, and changed part of it, and we are completely lost? Well, you have to deal with that gracefully. I mean, there's a point at which, of course, you got to say, well, I'm not even sure it's the same function anymore. But you have to deal with it gracefully rather than...
Absolutely. You know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah. Those little cases, and that's one of the things we evolved over time because for one, I mean, you cannot really let your design be affected by corner cases from the beginning, because then you end up with something that is completely messy. But at the same time, the key is exactly what you said. Okay, how you handle the things you don't handle, like, but on a graceful way. Like, okay, this case we cannot deal with it, but instead of just breaking something, we just let you know. So one of the things we were really obsessed about, especially, I mean, for diff is not such a big deal, right? Because you diff something, and if the diff is not correct, okay, the user will understand it and say, okay, it's not okay, but that's it. The real problem is with the merge, because the goal of a merge tool is to automate as many conflicts as possible. I mean, programmers don't want to be merging every single file manually. I mean, some of them do, but that's not really what as a whole we want to do. So you have to ensure you don't break the result. So if a merge is automatic, it must be correct. And that's something that we are really obsessed about. So one of the things we did from the very beginning was to take thousands of public repositories and do something what we call was a replay, right? So basically, it's finding all the merges there, then forcing to replace them, and making sure the result was the same. And when it wasn't, because there are cases where the result is not the same because it was made by a human or something, we tried to make sure all the components were there.
Right.
Also, we started with something even simpler, like, okay, you parse the code, you create a structure, you make a change, you write it down, but you must ensure there's nothing missing. For instance, something very easy is like, okay, a parser normally ignores the comments, but you cannot ignore the comments on a merge tool. Suppose you merge something, and then you get rid of the comments. That will be crazy, right? So we put a lot of effort in doing this sort of, how we call them, replays. Some of them are simpler, like, okay, you read a file, reconstruct it, write it, and it must be exactly the same. Sounds very simple, and it is at the end of the day, but it's something we tested a lot, and then doing merge replays.
You actually had a huge amount of test data to verify your approach. Yeah, that gives you a lot of confidence when you can.
And it's never, I mean, and even I always see testing like a safety net that gets thicker and thicker and thicker. You start with a few tests, and then you just catch the big ones. Then you make it thick, thicker and thicker, and then you catch more and more. Yeah, testing was always an obsession for us from the first day. I mean, I wouldn't say our tests are perfect because they are not, but we're really obsessed on that. Like really trying to have a huge safety net of automated tests.
I've yet to meet someone who says that their testing is perfect.
Well,
so don't worry about that.
I love to think that, and I love that will be true. But the thing is that sometimes we are so proud of every single release, especially in plastic. We make like a release a day, but we only like publish it for customers like twice a week or something like that. And every single release goes through, I think the last number was like 35 hours of automated testing, which means we use a lot of, I mean, it doesn't mean we wait 35 hours. It means we run a lot of those in parallel. And then it makes you feel like quite, I wouldn't say proud, but safe. Like, okay, we have a lot of testing. And then you just catch.
Gives you a lot of confidence.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of confidence. But even with that, sometimes you find a stupid bug in production and then you say, okay, what happened here? I mean, we made all that effort. I mean, like 40% of our code overall is testing. For instance, plastic in the server side is like 50% or so, and still there's always something you miss. But I mean, that's the state. That's where we are today, right? So.
I'm delighted to hear about this, your test focus. I think in the C++ world, we don't have enough test focus. I think culturally, everyone acknowledges how important testing is, but it's not part of our fabric the way it is with some other languages. And I think I've said this on the show before. I think it's because of our really old heritage. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but Alex once mentioned to me that when he made Alex Stepanov, when he made the submission of the what he called the standard template library to the standards committee, he said, I actually had a whole test suite on that, and it never even occurred to me. No one asked for it, and it never occurred to me to submit it. And I think that says something about our culture at the time. I think now it probably would people have thought about it, but at the time, testing was this afterthought. Testing was something that junior engineers did, and it wasn't considered as important and as valuable. And I think we acknowledge that intellectually, but it's not easy to change behavior. It's not easy to change culture. And so
I think it's something that is really changing over the last few years. But I really agree with you. I mean, I remember my first job back in Belgium. I was assigned at the beginning to the test group, and I said, hey, but I signed up to be a developer, right? Now I have a different vision, and I understand how important testing everything was. But out of college, I was like, hey, I want to develop, not to create tests. So I think things change a little bit for good, right? So yeah.
Well, how do you feel about that, Phil? Do you feel like you're as someone selling a test tool, or I guess selling is not maybe the right term for that, the developer of a test tool, do you feel that it's getting more respect now than it used to?
It is gradually, slowly, but I definitely see the changes over the years. And that was actually one of the reasons that I first decided to write Catch. That's probably the main reason, was that I felt that the existing test tools were just creating too much friction to actually get into it. So that was putting more people off, because it's hard enough to actually persuade people to start testing in the first place. But if you then make a complicated process for them to actually get started with it, that they'll just give up. So I'm really pleased that over the years, the feedback has constantly been that, because of Catch, people have been able to start testing whereas they weren't previously. So I'm glad to have been the small part of that change, but I think overall it's just been a sea change. What we need now is just somebody to start doing TDD courses in C++, and I think that will really help.
What a great idea!
Yeah.
Any idea who might do that?
Come to think of it, I think I'm doing one.
Oh, when's that going to happen?
There's one at CPPCon, but actually before that, I'm doing it at NDC TechTown.
Oh, okay, excellent. All right. And we might learn a little bit about Catch as students in that class.
It comes up. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's more about the process. I mean, you're not really pushing a particular tool. It's the process,
No.
right? The test-driven development process.
Exactly. And I almost feel a bit embarrassed to use Catch so much during the course, but it's just so much easier. So it doesn't seem worth trying to use anything else.
Right. So, so anyway, didn't mean to send us down this side shoot, Pablo, but I'm just delighted to hear about a company that's so test focused in their culture, and that's really exciting. The other thing I want to ask you about is, how does the semantic merge work in the flow? I guess what I'm saying is this an option for your customers, or is this just automatically when they do a merge, it just works so seamlessly that nobody ever says, how do I turn this semantic stuff off? I just want to see a text merge.
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, there are two things. First is that we sell Semantic as a standalone tool. So if you are a Git user and want to use it on Windows right now, because the version we have is restricted to Windows at this point, you can use it, right? Like, okay, you can plug it to Subversion or Git or any version control you're using. So suppose, I mean, the Git case, all you have to do is to configure your Git merge tool. So instead of seeing the, text file with marks or launching KDiv3 or any other of the great merge tools out there, you can just configure semantics. And then how it works, well, if it can automate the merge, you won't see anything. Like, okay, you run merge, it's automatic, period, nothing else to do. If it cannot automate it, then it's when it will show up. And the interface is actually quite similar after the second iteration, because the first one was like really alien to everyone, and that's why we decided to change it. But after second iteration, the interface is pretty similar to what you can see in, I don't know, KDiv3, as I said, or P4 merge or any other tools, like 3 panes with how it was, what one contributor did, what the other contributor did, and the result, right? So it's like 4 panels there. But the nice thing is that, of course, is dealing in a function per function way and so on. So going back to your question, one of the really nice things about Semantic is that many merges that are normally manual will end up being automatic. Like many small things on a daily basis, you don't even notice. Once you have it, of course, simply go away. So that's a nice thing. In fact, we have an option, which is, okay, I still want to show it even if it's automatic. And some people use it at the beginning till they start, trusting the tool and saying, okay, yes, what it's doing is, because we use some heuristics, but most of the merge stuff is really algorithmic. Like, okay, I have country. I mean, if you and I touch the same line, then there's no heuristic possible. It's a manual conflict. Right. The things you actually solve with semantic is that many times traditional text tools think there is a conflict because they are comparing the wrong method. Because you move something to different location, and once you understand there are different methods, that the conflict is automatic. That's it. But if we really touch the same block of code in the same function concurrently, there's no heuristic there. It's just, okay, it's manual.
So let me ask you this. You probably know this a lot because of the test stuff that you looked at, all those merges out there that you've analyzed. How often do people move functions?
Well, so again, that's a very good question. Surprisingly, more than what you will think about. We run many tests using public GitHub repositories, doing what we call merge replay, right? Like finding every merge they did and replying. And on average, we find that we can automate about 20% of the manual conflicts that happen there. So we can reduce, let's say 20% of manual conflicts. That normally means, I mean, not all merges we handle are related to moving code, but most of them are. So that means that people not having semantic, because they are not doing that. I mean, we are just replaying their repos. Not having that, I mean, so normally they try to avoid it. Still, they do it quite a few times. And then what we found out in teams that were using semantic, on purpose, let's say, I mean, just really using it, is that they do it even more because now they know they have it, right? But even
so the implication there is that our code is not as good as we would really like it to be because we're trying to avoid manual merges?
That's a very good conclusion. In fact,
In other words, if I didn't have to worry about this, I would move this around and make it easier to understand, maybe make it easier to maintain, but I don't want to have to go through a merge because I know somebody else might be changing there.
absolutely.
And so, yeah.
You hit exactly the thing that I try to explain from a more value perspective. Like, the real thing we do with semantic is not really doing merges. Our actual purpose is helping teams to clean up their code, because
Right.
you don't do refactors
Right.
as often as you should if you fear the merge. So that's I mean, what you said is exactly the tagline that started everything. So yeah.
Right. Wow. Interesting.
I wonder if there's
idea.
another way that using semantic merge can actually encourage you to improve your code as well. Because if the unit of granularity of the semantic merge is typically the function,
Yeah.
then I would imagine it'll work better if you have smaller functions. And the people tend to write these big functions and methods that really they should split up, but that's going to be harder to merge. So do you actually find that at all?
Yeah, well, the thing is that there's one thing we still don't do, which is dealing well with split functions. Like, okay, I have a function called whatever, and then I split it in three. That's something we don't handle yet. That's in the roadmap, actually. That's one of the difficult things we'd like to go through. But what we find very often is you move functions to a different class, you resort them because of whatever visibility reason or something like that, or you just decide to rename the whole thing. And what we find is that it still happens even if you don't use it. But as you mentioned before, the thing is, you feel safer if you are not thinking, hey, no one is going to merge this, so I better don't do it. I mean, what we found on many teams is like, you don't do refactor while you develop. I mean, generally speaking, because then, okay, let's wait for this event to actually do the cleanup. While if you have a better way to merge, it's like, okay, while I'm doing any fixes, I mean, while you're doing fixes, I could be cleaning up the code. I mean, I mean, of course, I don't want to say to listeners today that this is like magic, right? Of course, if you completely change the file, there's no semantic or human able to merge that, right? I mean, you'll have to spend time on that. But if what you do is makes sense in terms of, it's different, but it's not like crazily different, then many stuff can be automated.
But I wonder if what Phil was trying to say was not so much affecting merges, but for new code, if people are more likely to write smaller functions in new code because they know that merges will be easier if they're using smaller, more cohesive functions. Is that what you were trying to say, Phil? Because that's what I was hearing you saying.
Okay. So yeah, that's an interesting point. To be honest, I'm so biased with that I never thought on that. I mean, I'm so biased towards creating small functions, like that. I didn't think it will help in that way, but yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, I think we live in our small bubble, doing our code for. I mean, we've been living in the same code base for 14 years, so we have this motto, which is like, any bad thing you do will come back. So even if you don't want to, yeah. So it's like, I mean, what we say is, we try to do clean code, not even because we believe on that, which we do, but it's more like, an selfish way of thinking. Like, if you do it wrong, it will come back and hit you back. Because, yeah, exactly. That's why, right? So yeah, I didn't think about that.
There may be a show title in there somewhere.
I will take note of that, actually. Like,
I know some of the training material that I use is based on Scott Meyer's training material. And one of the things he says in the section when we're talking about lambdas, he says, short, I don't remember exactly how he says it, short focused lambdas are probably best. And every time I look at that, I make to the class, I think short focused functions in general sound like they're best to me. I don't know why lambdas should be any different in that regard. I know exactly what Scott was trying to say, but yeah, having short functions that make the merge tool a lot easier. But I think as Phil was saying, is if you know that short functions are going to make your merge life easier down the road.
Yeah.
It might be more worth it to you to think a little harder about. I mean, I fall in this trap all the time. I write an object that is really, really focused. It does one exact thing. Oh, wait a minute, I got to add one note. Okay, so that's, and before you know it, this single well-developed object is really doing about 4 different things. And, you know, it started out in such a nice idea. And I know it's just because at every little step, it seemed to make more sense to just tweak it a little bit than to take the time and refactor it, you know. And it's kind of what you were saying is that will come back to haunt you if you take that shortcut. Right?
Absolutely, and but even in a really high focus, yeah, even if you focus on high quality a lot, it will happen. I mean, code rots, code gets worse, and you just look into it and said, how on earth did we do that? And at the end of this, you didn't do it like this. It just evolved. I mean, it's like
Right.
it was probably a good idea when it started, and then it got worse and worse. One thing we are doing, most of the code we write is in C#. So I started my career as a C++ developer, and now I'm a weak-minded C# developer. Sorry for that. But I have a lot of respect for the real, C#, C++, and so on. But one of the things we end up doing over the years is that we write more and more on a, I wouldn't say really functional oriented, probably it is, but really more on, really simple code with functions and passing, everything it needs and not relying that much on a status and all that. So really trying to do simpler and simpler and simpler code every day. That's really our motto. So I don't know if I'm just going back or I'm really going in the right direction, but that's what we try to do, really keeping it as simple as possible.
If I can make a plug for a previous guest, I've been reading Yvonne's book on functional programming, and you can tell I'm I don't know, maybe a sixth of the way in, but so far I keep looking at this and I say to myself, is that functional programming? Is it just good programming? Yeah. I mean, everything he's talking about, it's like, well, that's just good programming. And I really feel like, yeah, making functions small and focused and well named, and
functional programming is just good programming.
Yeah.
But there's something that happened. I don't know if it just happened to me or my entire generation, but when I started out of college and started doing the first professional programming, I will say, I was so biased by the object-oriented programming and trying to do things well, what I thought it was well, that I ended up over-designing a lot. And now I really have this view of, okay, the simplest, the better. Like probably when you are a newbie, I think it happens with the language too. I mean, I remember when I was learning C, I don't know, last century, really trying to do these crazy things in a single line. Like, you felt smarter or something. Now you'll never do that anymore, right? It's like, just keep it simple and that's it. But I think maybe there's this joke, joke on the internet, like, okay, what a newbie does is hello world. Then as a junior, you do something much more complicated and so on and so on. And then as an expert, you again write hello world, something like that. So it's very funny. It's a little bit funny and also discouraging at the same time. I think it's true.
I think I was gonna tweet out that the difference between a computer scientist and a software engineer is that if someone says, "Hey, that's clever," the computer scientist thinks that's a compliment, and the software engineer thinks that's a bug.
Okay, I will use this one. Yeah, that's very good.
If only it was true, though.
Yeah, right.
Very good.
Yeah. Okay. So, was there other stuff we want to talk about? Oh, I wanted to talk about if I can get you to come to CPPCon and talk about semantic merge at tool time.
Yeah. Why not? Let's see.
That would be great. Yeah. How successful is this? You said that it is possible for someone to use semantic even without using plastic, right?
Absolutely.
You've made it a separate, and are you making some headway there? Are there people who are interested in the?
Yeah, we've been in business with it for a few years already. I mean, our main product is obviously plastic. That's really what pays the bills. We didn't pay much attention into the marketing side of things for semantics. Not we didn't put as much effort as we did with the other with the other product. So it's not like a super big business for us. It's important in terms of a strategic point of view, and it's part of the main product at the same time. But yeah, I think it's interesting, and we have a lot of plans to really make it bigger because, well, first we'd like to have it on Mac OS too, on Linux too. I mean, our main, I mean, plastic is on the 3 platforms with GUIs and everything, so it's not such a huge thing, and we want to make it there. And then we are also, I mean, there's one thing, right? Some people don't really know what we're talking about till we really make a good explanation of it, right? So I think we try to we need to make it simpler and to make it available not only for like super merge pros or something like that, which was probably like our view at the very beginning, but really to make it as simple as possible so that anyone, even, you know, really junior engineers, so not people that are into the merging or version control stuff, because you can be a super huge programmer, super good programmer, and not really an expert on Git or plastic or anything like that. And that's, I think, it's one of our pending things to do, like making it really much simpler and easy to use.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that kind of I find a little surprising which I'm not really in the business of doing this now, but I used to interview a lot of people right out of college, and was surprised how many of them essentially never used a repository for anything. They went through 4 years of computer science, and they never put anything they wrote into a repository. And it's not that they needed it so much in college, although I suspect it would have saved their bacon a few times when they did something disastrous. But when they transition into real professional work, they're really missing an important skill that we just, why are we not teaching people? Why are we preparing people to be software engineers, but not giving them software engineering tools? Instead, we focus just on computer science, which is an important skill, but not everything you need.
I'm an optimistic, of course, but I think that changed a lot over the last few years because, for instance, ourselves in Plastic SCN, we give a lot of licenses to universities all around the world, and then you have GitHub and GitLab and all those Git products that are, I think every single student these days knows about. I mean, I was on a we had this contest here, a local contest for like young programmers and so on, and every single submission was in GitHub. I remember 10 years ago, nothing was even close to being version control, right? So I think that changed a lot in the last few years. Like I think all the ecosystem around Git, although they are competitors of our product,
right.
They
did create a revolution. You have to acknowledge that. So.
Absolutely, they did a great job evangelizing the whole world and teaching the whole world that. So I think they did a super good work there.
Yeah. All right. Are there other things that we want to talk about before we slip off?
It's been so long since we've done this, I've forgotten the format. Is there something I wanted to say? Oh, we did put out a call for reviewers for CPPCon. We got a record number of submissions, just kind of blew the doors off. But we put out a call. I think we're in great shape now. We have 3 times as many people on the program committee as we did when we started. So we're in great shape. But I'm expecting a great program in September simply because we got over 260 submissions and we have about 120 spots. So you can figure out, of those submissions, I could probably go through and really easily find maybe 20 submissions I'd rather not have. But the vast majority of those submissions are solid submissions that we would be proud to have. And we're going to end up saying no to, something like 200 submissions.
that are solid. And that's really tough. But what that means for attendees is that the program in September should be really good. At least if the program committee does the job they're supposed to do, which is to find those gems, which I'm pretty excited. I think it's going to be a great conference. And so I'm looking forward to that.
And talking of CPPCon, and you already mentioned it earlier, Tool Time is going to be back. And I haven't had a chance to really start looking at it yet, but we'll get that sorted quite soon and start announcing things. But yeah, if you have a tool that you want to talk about, start thinking about how you might want to do that now.
We'll twist Pablo's arm and see if we can get plastic and semantic merge represented there. That would be great.
That'll be great. Yeah.
All right. So I guess we're ready to say safe coding. This is how we end it, right? Do you know about this, Pablo? We're all going to say, wish everybody safe coding.
Safe coding.
Well, thanks for joining us, Pablo. And I hope we see you in September.